Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar for the Disability Confidence series. And this one is all about inclusive buildings and workplaces. We're delighted to have with us the lovely Jim Rush from HSBC. We have also got Paul Cutler. Paul is over in China at the moment. It's 10 o'clock at night and he's got a fearsome cold. We have lost him, but we're hoping that he'll be able to rejoin. But if he's not able to, Jim's able to carry the day. Fabulous man that he is. And obviously, any questions you've got, please put in the Q&A. My colleague Ariadne will be looking out for those, and we'll be sending out resources at the end of this. There is a closed caption button on your screen if you want to see comments and things written down, so you can follow along with us a little bit easier. But if we can sort of kick off, Jim, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Great to be here. Thanks for inviting me along, Tracy.
Pleasure.
So I'm Jim Rush. I am the Global Head of Health and Safety at HSBC, but my responsibilities also include that for our Workplace Adjustments Programme, which has been quite well established in the UK now for a number of years. And we've recently been expanding that, bringing in some of our markets in ASP, in the Asia Pacific region, and also in the Middle East. And coming from a health and safety background, that's my background. What I see is a lot of overlap between what I suppose my first hat was, with workplace sort of assessments and workstation assessments and DSE, with workplace assessments. Lots of them sort of have an impact on sort of the office environment, and also more recently into that area of inclusive design and how we can sort of take that through into being more proactive, rather than sort of reacting to the needs of individuals, although they are also always going to be part of the role.
Absolutely. A fairly straightforward question, if you may. Why does anybody do this? What is physical accessibility?
So, a good question. Physical accessibility. I suppose for me, it's about how we make the places where our colleagues work accessible to them to come in and do their job, because everybody needs to make a living. But I suppose for us as well as a bank, also making sure that our properties are accessible to our customers, because although customers globally are starting to migrate over to digital means and digital platforms and online banking, we still have a network of branches in this country and overseas where customers want to come in and do their banking in person, and I'm sure that will always be the case. So for me, that physical accessibility is, it's really key and fundamental to the business.
So how do you go about it? I mean, one of the things that we've looked at when we do audits, because it's something that Microlink gets involved in, is we look at actually designing environments that work for everybody. And we use universal design, which is all based on what REBA have done. Do you use that in what you do? What is it?
Yes, we try to make sure that our designs are inclusive for HSBC's, I suppose, purpose for being for our operations, and we're all about our customers. So hopefully we start from that sort of that basic principle of making the environment in which we operate accessible to all. And actually, I'm going to hand over to Paul for this one, because he's probably
Paul, thank you
he's
for
the
joining.
designer here,
He
and
is the
Paul can
designer.
probably answer this
Paul,
one much better.
could you give us just a snapshot of who you are and what you do at HSBC? And thank you for joining again.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
yes.
So Paul Cutler, Global Head of Branch Design. So I look at all aspects of branch design, but that includes how customers come into our branches and wealth centres, and the accessibility elements attached to that. So we want to make our branches open and welcome to all of our customers. So we make them accessible, inclusive, so that everybody who comes in can enjoy the spaces and have a conversation with us at HSBC.
Why do you want them to enjoy the space, Paul? I mean, crikey, we're just going in to pay a check-in, aren't we? Or pay a bill?
Look, I think when we look at it from a customer journey perspective, certainly from the retail environment, you're looking to make sure that you engage customers from all angles. So that would be when you're looking at universal design, that would be looking at age, sex, culture, and language. And look, the reason I'm struggling to talk to you today is
I know you've got a cold. I'm
yeah,
so
yeah,
sorry.
yeah. I've got a cold, but look, I'm out in China, and one of the things that we look at across the group is how those journeys different and how we make the environment inclusive for everybody. And when we're looking at the different groups, obviously in some of our markets, we've got older populations. China is an aging population, so we need to think about what does that mean in terms of the design.
Mm.
We're also from a universal, from a design perspective, in terms of our target audience, we deal with international customers, and we deal predominantly outside the UK. People might know this, but outside the UK, it's predominantly a wealth market. So we've got two
Oh.
retail markets, which is Hong Kong and the UK, but the rest of it is focused predominantly on wealth markets, wealth customers, and those customers tend to be older. So when you're designing journeys for older customers, you have to bear in mind that the average age I think is about 60, 63. So you need to think about how making the chairs accessible, and looking at how that whole journey works. And that's one of the things I've been going back to China again. One of the things I've been quite interested in just being over here, because there's a lot more facilities in China for the ambulant disabled. Yeah, so we tend to focus a lot more on putting fully accessible toilets in for
Mm.
people in wheelchairs.
Yeah.
What you notice about here with a huge aging population is everywhere has got grab rails on it. All the toilets, a lot of the public spaces, there's grab rails everywhere. And they've really thought about all of those different things that you might need
Mm.
as you're trying to navigate space
Almost
as an older
future
customer.
proving.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you think, well, China's was an emerging economy. It's probably not so much
Yeah.
now. It's probably an advanced economy, but they've absolutely everything is designed with the ambulant disabled in mind. And I think, I'm just looking at it from somebody who does design, but I think something you keep learning about. And I certainly think, looking at it, I think we could do more for the ambulant disabled. I think that's something, as we deal in HSBC with an older population, it's something we need to look at.
Mm. I'm glad I'm under the age of old. That's made me quite happy, Paul.
Well, I
Thank you
know.
for that.
I'm sorry. I think of myself as you know, I've got to think of my future as well. So it's something that I'll be
Absolutely.
designing for.
But this is what's weird, isn't it? It affects all of us across the board. And I mean, we'll often talk about 80% of us acquiring a disability, and that could be visible or non-visible. And when you're talking about ambulatory disabled people, invariably it's a non-visible disability, unless they happen to have a guide dog with them. So that it's not clear. But you've done a lot of work, the pair of you, both from the product side and the actual touchy-feely chairs, desks, etc., and lighting, to the actual overall design of a space. Do you find there's much difference in different markets? Can you do a playbook that will work over the whole globe? Do you need to make it work in the UK right first? Sorry, that's three questions. Who wants to
No, that's
answer
fine.
one of them? Sorry.
I don't.
I think they're. Go on, Paul. You go first. You're the designer.
No, well, I I think, I mean, what's interesting is when you look at the standards, a lot of the standards are very similar across the different markets. Certainly for,
So
uh,
these are the BS 8300 with the
well,
M
I think when you
section.
look at, yeah, I mean, if you look at the British standards, the Hong Kong standard is very similar,
Mm.
and then the standards that's been adopted by the SA in United States. And when you look at, I mean, Dubai standards are very good. They've taken it a step further in many respects, but um, the central tenets of how you make things wheelchair accessible, I think, are quite similar. I think Where it gets more complicated, and I think it's something that Jim will talk about, because I think he's really close to that, is actually understanding the lived experience. So you can think about what the standards are, but actually when you try to apply them just universally, you can't do it. So if I'm looking in the UK, for example, people use guide dogs. That's something that somebody who's blind might do, but
Mm.
in some markets
Yeah.
they don't use guide dogs. So what you find is that tactile flooring is very much predominant, but actually the idea of a guide dog doesn't make sense to them. And in China, you see tactile flooring everywhere. I mean, it's not, Mexico, you'll see it on the way into the branch, up to the till, or up to a consultation point.
Mm.
In China, all of the public pavements along, I mean, everywhere you want to go, there's not just, in the UK, it'll be as you're trying to cross a road, there'll be some tactile paving. In China, it's everywhere. Yeah.
Oh.
So, yeah, I mean, it's just literally along the street, and it's through the airport, and it's just directing people all the way. So you go, well, actually, what's the right answer? And the right answer isn't necessarily the best solution, because if people aren't expecting the solution that you're providing, it doesn't work. You have to provide a solution that people would expect to follow,
Yeah.
or that they, that's not to say you can't get better at it. And, I mean, one of the things that, everybody travels and everybody goes abroad now, and you see better things, and people get used to saying, well, why aren't we doing that? But if customers and consumers and colleagues aren't expecting it, you can't force on a standard to people. They have to be able to say, yes, that helps me. They have to feel that
Mm.
it helps them to do that. Jim, over to you. I mean, you've got some great examples of perhaps how the importance of the lived experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just picking up on what you were saying there, one of the things that we're really conscious of is that we have I suppose, a stage that we've reached in the UK
Mm.
where we are designing to what we think is a good standard, but you can't just pick up the way in which we've done it and drop it onto and enforce it upon other markets, because they are different. They do things in different ways. Another example that myself and Paul have spoken about is in relation to hearing loss. If you have a deaf customer in the UK, there would be an expectation that we would provide hearing loops
Mm.
to be able to converse with them in a branch or in an office environment. But in some of our other markets, maybe in China or in sort of Mexico, um, if hearing loops aren't used as predominantly, or the technology is not available in the market, then it won't work for us to say, right, you must adopt the UK standard, because they'll
Yeah.
just spend a lot of money that
Makes
nobody ever
sense.
makes use of.
Yeah.
And there's probably something alternative in terms of the way that they are providing services or providing support to colleagues and to customers who are deaf. So there's flexibility that we need when we develop our own internal standards, so they're not too prescriptive.
Yeah.
There are principles that we want to achieve, uh, but we need to provide that flexibility in how you get there for the different markets to reflect their local culture, and also, I suppose, their stage in the evolution towards disability and
Yeah.
views towards disability, whether that be visible or non-visible. Um, Paul mentioned about providing support for colleagues and customers who are disabled. What we've tended to find across the globe is that there is more acceptance and discussion that takes place around physical disability, but it can become very centric on wheelchair users
Yeah.
and services for wheelchair users. But the discussions around neurodiversity are nowhere near to the same level. And
Yeah.
sometimes, unless you sort of sit back and take stock, you can assume that in other markets, everybody is having the same kind of discussions about neurodiversity as we do in the UK. And what we're finding is that's obviously that's not the case. In some markets, the topic is still very much taboo, and people who maybe are neurodiverse, it's not expected that they would come into the workplace, that
Yeah.
they are almost sort of looked after at home by parents. So there's a real range, and a big piece of what we're doing is also around, you know, education and listening to colleagues. We have many colleagues in the bank who are members of our employee resource groups. So one of the, I suppose, one of the strongest and most well established is our ability ERG. And learning from their lived experiences has been really eye-opening, I think, for us as the team who are putting the designs into practice, who are building these things out and then making them available to colleagues. And there can be simple things around, you know, do you provide braille signage? Because that's what one group of colleagues might say is the norm, but another group will say, well, actually, we don't use braille. Tactile signage is much better. That's what people are using now.
Yeah.
So there are sometimes, I suppose, conflicts in terms of the messages that you get from different individuals that you have to then try and work out a strategy to take forwards. And then there could be simple things around listening to feedback from colleagues who are wheelchair users, who will say, well, that's great, you know, you've got the physical environment right, but when I go into the coffee shop, all the stirrers and the sugar are up on a shelf at the back and I can't reach them.
Yeah.
So we're working with our partners as well, around how we just make sure that that whole journey through the space is thinking about the decisions that we make, and looking at it through different eyes.
We had a question here where somebody was asking, do you do this for colleagues? Do you do this for colleagues as well?
Absolutely, yeah,
Mm.
because the spaces that we have are very much used by colleagues and customers.
Mm.
So although, you know, we will talk about customers and the customer journey in branches, we're also very cognizant of the colleague journey and the colleague experience. Our workplace adjustment program is very much focused around the individual needs of colleagues. But we've been doing a lot of work in looking at the common themes from workplace adjustments to say, well, what can we learn from these? What are the repeating things that we need to change in terms of our overall design, whether that be through selection of furniture, the types of wayfinding we might put into our buildings, whether we make spaces available that are sort of quiet spaces. There's so many things that are sort of coming through in terms of the feedback and the lessons learned that we're now building into the design decisions we make, right from the outset of new design.
But isn't that important to try and think about these things up front? Because I should imagine retrofitting is an expensive business.
It certainly can be.
Absolutely.
And if you're trying to
Yeah,
retrofit for
absolutely.
every individual,
Mm.
then you can get sort of, you know, lots of conflicts there, in terms of one thing that you're putting in place for one person might make it more difficult for another.
Yeah.
Whereas if we can try to get things right from the outset, then it's certainly easier, to do it that way. If you're looking to put in powered doors, easier to do it with an early design decision during the planning stage than to
Yeah.
try and find an automatic door opener that will fit on the door that you installed, never expecting it to need
And
that
I mean,
kind
that
of
that can
technology.
run into the hundreds of thousands if you get that wrong and you have to do it back later.
So we have global minimum standards. So the global minimum standards are sort of based on the optimum. But obviously, as we've just been discussing, we can't anticipate, the norms and the individual circumstances in every market. So what happens then is when the standards aren't met, the markets can say, or the individual can say, well, actually, the reason we haven't done it is because of this. Yeah. So we try to set and say, well, this is what we think is best practice. This is where we should be going. But if there's a reason for not doing it, let us know. Let's have a conversation about it because we don't know everything. But equally, to try and avoid that £100,000 charge, whatever
Yeah.
that you're, Tracy, that you're talking about, we always design with, and the minimum standards aren't just about wheelchair accessibility. They cover neurodiversity and the other aspects that we are talking about, whether a blind person, how they might navigate a space. So they cover all of that, and then we have a conversation and talking about, yes, we were talking about customers, but one of our biggest inputs is from the employee resource groups. So when we're designing our Sheffield branch, for example, we had a lovely lady, a blind lady that works for us in HSBC, and she was helping us with how we should do the Braille signage. So it's when we speak to our employees, it's both from an employee journey perspective, but also we get their input as users of branches and banks. They've all got, they all go through the customer experience as well. So we get their feedback. And that was very interesting because, typically, like a lot of organizations, we employ lots of consultants as well. So a lot of the stuff that we've done, for example, on Braille signage was based on some of the work we've done with our consultants, and it was all very good. But one of the case in points that I remember when we were looking at the Sheffield branch, which was one of our accessibility trials, was that we used to put the Braille signage on the door on the left hand side, and we did that because the experience was supposed to be, if you put it on the door, that a customer that's reading Braille would touch the door, and if the door opened, obviously they wouldn't be able to read the Braille. But when we spoke to a lot of the users, they said, well, no, but we'd expect to see it on the door, or not see it, sorry. We'd expect to have it to be on the door. So again.
Did you put it on both in the end then, Paul?
It's an example of where.
Oh, we might be losing you again, Paul.
You have to put things where people expect to find.
Paul, if we can cut back to Jim for a minute, because your quality is going. So Jim, in terms of when you've got that conflicting information, so you've got one person saying, don't put it on the door because as soon as you've opened the door, and I had this, I went to, I won't say which hospital, but recently to have my eyes checked, and they had the door open. So you come down the corridor and they say, look out for this signage, Miss Abbott, it's bright yellow, you'll find it. Unfortunately, they'd got the door open that then hid the sign. So I had to wander up and down the corridor for a little while, like a silly person, until and when it's to do with eyes, you start thinking that wasn't very well designed. So do you do it on
Absolutely.
both?
Sometimes we'll do it on both, or we'll use different types of sort of either equipment or technology, or redesigning of the signs, and looking at what's going to be the best way to get that message across. And that's a really good example that you had there around, I think, some of the old types of decision making that we've experienced with sort of architects, designers, where they're sort of almost designing to the book to say, right, we're designed to approve documents, we're designed to the British standard, we have to put this sign in, and we put it here. But once you then start to look at the operational environment, where the doors are maybe held open with magnetic holders to make ease of access better, all of a sudden, if the sign's on the door, you can't see it. You need that. That's where that sort of input
it's
from
the common sense, isn't it?
and input from the building users, the building operators, about where that signage would best be positioned. And sometimes things need to be changeable, and we need to flex and move things around as we learn those lessons. It can't be just like a one-off.
Thanks, Jim. Paul, have we got you back?
Yeah, sorry.
No, don't worry. Don't worry. You were talking fabulously. Tell me more about Sheffield, because I saw the pictures, and I was fortunate enough to see them in the design mode. And it's just an awesome bloody branch. Why did you decide to do it? Was it fearfully expensive? And in the end of the day, have you been able to measure the difference for both your colleagues and your customers? Is it something you're going to do again? Was it successful?
Yeah, and it's something that we have been replicating across. So it was always the idea was always that one of the standards that we set when we were doing it was that we would only really look at stuff that we could replicate. We do a lot of branch of the future projects, and you know, you sort of try to look into the future, and nobody can really look in the future. And in the past, we sort of looked at, oh yes, we're going to look at some futuristic design, and you know, you'll see it with any number of retailers or banks that you design something that looks like a spaceship,
Yeah,
which
I used
is,
to
you
love
know,
seeing
it's
shops like that.
fascinating. Yeah, it's fascinating, but of course they never
Mm,
get rolled out because actually designing for something that is just based on aesthetics isn't really customer driven. So what we decided to do was to say, well, actually, if we were to do the most customer driven branch, what would it be? It would be based on actually making a really good customer journey, making it the most accessible branch we've ever done, and making it the most sustainable branch we've ever done. So we literally said, well, how can we make it the most accessible branch? How can we make it the most sustainable branch? And although, you know, when we've talked about it, we haven't really talked about the sustainability much, but actually
mm.
that that leads in quite well to the wellness and actually some of the neurodiversity elements, because you know the way we've evolved, as human being in nature, and actually when you're trying to do resolve some of the questions about how you improve the environment from a neurodiversity perspective, making the environment more sustainable, more natural, having more natural light, having more greenery actually works quite well. So that was good. So it was a case of looking at all of those elements and trying to make a branch that was the most inclusive that we could make it. And it's funny because in actually setting that as a challenge, it really galvanized everybody. Everybody was quite, because everybody could see what the destination was rather than something obscure. Everybody was really up for it, and we have learned a lot on that journey, and we've rolled it out to lots of the branches in UK subsequently. And I'd be first to say, as with anybody, I mean, I know there's lots of experts on this call. I'm sure we haven't got everything right, but it's something
But
that
you're doing something.
yeah, it's something we're actually trying to improve on, and it's something where we're continually learning, and we've talked about some of the learnings already.
Mm.
But as we do it, we're learning. Have we seen what's the improvements we've seen? It's always difficult to some extent to measure some of this stuff, but in terms of this, the engagement from our colleagues, it's been far better. In terms of the feedback that we've had from the customers, it's been very, very positive.
Nice.
I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean,
Yeah,
maybe that's what we need
please.
to do. I mean, but for, but for one of the things we looked at, we said, well, actually, we'll look at some of the, I mean, Jim does some great stuff on workplace adjustments. And when we put things in and how we can improve our working environment. So what we did is for both customers and colleagues, we put in different types of equipment. One of them was a penguin mouse, just to help our colleagues working on the computer.
Can I
Um,
just ask, what is a penguin mouse? I'm sure I should know, but it
so,
sounds fabulous.
so
Does it waddle? Is it
so
no?
normally on your mouse, it's like
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Okay.
Now
Yeah.
that isn't a natural movement. And I
No.
went to my doctor at one point. I said, I've got frozen shoulders. She said, do you use a mouse? I said, yeah, I do. She said, it's quite common. Well, because you're not designed,
Oh
your
wow.
body's not designed to move like that.
Yeah.
So a penguin mouse is designed more like a
A
throttle
joystick.
a joystick,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
And it's designed like that, right? And actually that's more natural. And anyway, as part of this stuff where we were testing everything, a lot of our colleagues just said, oh gosh, I'm going to use one of these, you know, penguin mouse, which is like, you know, joystick. They said it's far easier, just find it easier. And that's the great thing about when you look at accessibility and inclusion, actually a lot of the stuff's just better design. And you could look at it and go, actually that works for everybody.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff hasn't been designed with
Yeah.
everybody in mind. And
For
we
sure.
just got some feedback going, oh, well, we need to do that. We need to just do that because that works for everybody. Another example was for sustainability within the branch. We're trying to stop heat.
Or even stop your internet from working. That was going to be a great story. That's going to be the best one
It
of the
was.
webinar.
It's a
We will
cliffhanger.
catch up. It was a cliffhanger, but I keep saying that Paul, I'm sure you'll all agree, has got the most amazing frozen face. I have not got that face. I've got a face for radio. What can I say? But it is really interesting, the point about what works naturally in things and the design of accessibility. That there's so many things. If you even look around your common garden home, that you've got in the house that are very ordinary, like a frying pan now has that padded rubber holder, which all
Yeah,
frying pans that you buy now have. That was invented for people who have dexterity challenges and problems with holding on to something, particularly something hot, because they couldn't hold a cloth as well. If you look at your phone, not your phone, if you're looking on the keyboard in a post office, for example, the middle number, so you can orientate your fingers if you're visually impaired, the number 5 has got a raised dot on it, so you can orientate. And there's a great story about the post office. I think I can share it. I'm going to share it anyway. They'd actually rolled out all of these when it first came out, the chip and pin first came out. They rolled it out in something like 5,000 branches, terribly proud. And then somebody went, you haven't got your dot on the number 5, so all the visually impaired customers can't orientate, and they had to start all over again. And it's these simple things, whether or not it's the goods that you've got. I mean, you've got a great array behind you there of accessibility tools like your OrCams and task lighting.
absolutely. Yep,
But
yep.
again, that drives it. I mean, you're very much in tandem, you and Paul, because Paul can design the sort of the shell, the environment, and then you're stocking it with the stuff that makes it work.
Yeah, and we work very closely with our colleagues in IT.
Mm,
Craig in our IT team, who leads on assistive technology, works very much and has been involved in that design process as well, to make sure that we're using the technology that's available to the best purpose. And that might not just be the physical types of
mm,
technology, but also a lot of the assistive technology software that's now available that is designed maybe for one purpose,
yeah.
but actually is very useful to all colleagues, whether that be sort of, mind mapping type software that just makes it easier to create your reports, to create your minutes, or whether it be speech to text software, speech to, text to speech. There's lots of examples where I think there's assistive technology that's available, designed for one purpose, but is useful for everybody.
One of the things I wanted to ask you specifically about, Jim, is the adjustment management and scaling. And
Mm.
you're very much, and I'm not blowing smoke, you are global leaders when it comes to workplace adjustments and inclusive environments. So both the places like your Sheffield branch and your new St Paul's offices and bank offices that you're designing at the moment. But what does it take to build systems that allow the adjustments to both be proactive, consistent, and then probably most important, scalable? Because we talked a bit before about, how do you cope with the intersectionality of disability, maybe with race, with religion? Do you create a quiet space for one neurodivergent person that you then have to allow somebody who's of a different faith to use as a prayer room? How do you cope with that sort of thing?
Yeah, so the way that we've tried to tackle it is having some underlying guiding principles, that apply globally to all of our markets where we operate, but that aren't so prescriptive that they sort of almost force our will from the global team onto markets where maybe they're not ready to
Yeah,
implement something at this stage. And I think we talked earlier about that, that evolution of the disability journey and the disability conversation in some markets. Not everywhere is at the same level. So we've taken I suppose the model that we operate in the UK, and the bones of that to say, if you're going to develop a workplace adjustment service in your country, in Vietnam as an example,
hmm,
then this is what we're seeking to achieve. But you're going to need to explore the local market to find out, can you do this, or how would you get to that point,
yeah.
or what does your roadmap look like, and timeline to achieve it? Because I think initially there was maybe a view that we should just pick up the UK model, and in 12 months
Pick and
it would
drop
be
and
up and
yeah.
established everywhere globally. And it was it's a fairly hard lesson to find out that that just wasn't going to be achievable.
Well, it's almost like imperialism in its worst guise,
Yeah,
isn't
yeah,
it?
yeah. There's things that we would like to achieve,
Mm,
and we would like to get to a point where we have that fully consistent service across the world. But if you're looking at a workplace adjustment service from scratch in a market that's not had it before, then probably the best place to start is with the physical disability, and the sort of wheelchair use, and what we would now say is very much old hat in the UK of ramps and doors. Um, but that's not necessarily always well established
mm.
in some of the markets. So we need to get that in first and build the blocks up. And over time, we can start to have the conversations and do the education around neurodiversity, and how do we support colleagues who are autistic, have ADHD, dyslexic, whatever it might be, to start to provide them with assistive technology. But if we go big bang, and start to try and offer these services to everybody all at once, then there is I suppose, a danger that it can be seen as a bit of a failure if you're not getting people coming forward and asking for that support.
Yeah.
People will start to
We,
say, well,
we
why did we do that? It's not needed. You've wasted our time. So we want to avoid that and make sure we build at the right speed.
you've oversolved.
Yes.
Almost, haven't you? You've given a
Yeah,
solution
too
without
early.
understanding what the challenge is. We've got a
Yeah.
question here actually from Paula. My reasonable adjustment at the moment, and I have to say, as I mentioned, going to the eye hospital, I've got a really bad cataract at the moment. I'm waiting for them to change it. I can't see things very clearly, so forgive me doing my old lady monocle bit. But we have a question from Paula Coogan, and I don't know whether it's a Paul or a Jim one around the cognitive disabilities and neurodiversity, and what kind of things can you do to promote, to prompt people to remember and work with a variety of people and developing people who have a range of these experiences. So what are you doing around neurodivergence, both in the
So
built environment and workplace adjustments?
yeah, I mean, in terms of workplace adjustments, then we have a service that offers support um, to assist colleagues, whatever their need might be, whether they are neurodivergent, have a long-term health condition, or a disability. And we don't ask for somebody to have had a clinical diagnosis.
Mm,
We very much adopt a model where if somebody feels that they would benefit from further support, then we will sort of make an assessment of what their needs are, to provide some support from sort of the range of options that are available. And that can be very varied. We've spoken about some of the examples earlier on, but the starting point is, I suppose, behind all of this is having a culture whereby people feel confident to come forward and ask. And I think we've been very lucky, certainly in the UK, in having very senior leadership who have lived experiences but are willing to share those experiences that make colleagues feel comfortable in coming forward and asking for that support. And once we've got that established, then the ERGs that Paul mentioned, the employee resource groups, have been a very sort of vital part of our journey in coming forwards and telling us about things that we're getting wrong, so that we can learn and make improvements, whether that be in the way that we provide workplace adjustments, and more recently, how we can then take that into the universal design, and not just provide a solution for an individual, but how we can think more broadly. And that's where I think it's come into Paul's world, with the design and making sure that we think about neurodiversity, as part of our design thinking as well.
lovely. And that segues lovely back to you, Paul. Thank you for
So
coming back. I'm
yeah,
sure
so
you're stopping and having some, I don't know,
yeah,
crispy duck in between.
that's it. Yeah, absolutely.
What
So
do you do?
just sorry,
Did it come into
just
your design? Sorry.
yeah,
Yes.
just in picking up on Jim's point, I think the culture
Yeah,
is very important.
please.
And I think if you got the senior leadership support that Jim was talking about, the ERGs, the next stage is that you've got to recruit people. So one of the things that the UK were doing, which I thought was fantastic, they were recruiting people who were neurodiverse, and they were looking to do them, at various different jobs, data analysis, risk analysis, and things like that, that might lean towards certain specialisms that those people might be better at, or and I'm not saying those are the right jobs. I'm just saying that they were looking at how these people and different types of groups would be representative of the population. So if you get a workforce that is representative of your population, you're more likely to understand the needs of those users. So I think that's critical. The second point is, when we're looking at the design, obviously we're looking at flexibility in the design. So when we were looking at spaces for the neurodiverse, we were looking at adjustable lighting. We had circadian lighting that was coming into some spaces, not all spaces, select spaces. We were
Interesting.
putting adjustable heating, and this was in the back office for our employees and also in the front office for our customers. Adjustable heating, providing fidget objects.
I love
And
that.
looking at different things that we could do. So you wouldn't necessarily see them because we put a cupboard in the room and it's actually hidden. But if they're required, we can pull them out. So, but actually, if you've got people that work for you that actually recognise the need for that stuff, that makes it a lot easier, because our employee resource groups need to be have the participation of those people. And I think one of the things that we found a little bit tricky, 3 to 5 years ago, is actually we didn't actually recognize all of these things. So we didn't necessarily, it wasn't easy to identify them in our employee resource groups, but it's a lot easier now.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. We've got a question actually, which I can only partially read, and I do apologize about this, from Amy, talking about working with a small charity and having challenges around making the offices accessible and what they can do with financial constraints. Are there any really low-hanging fruits? I mean, there's some things you mentioned there, Paul, about, if you're making an inclusive space, something as simple as a fidget tool, a fidget toy. I'm sure you've all seen them. I mean, I tend to play with my pen, but I'm not fancy. But they're really inexpensive, aren't they?
Yeah. Jim, over to you. Workplace is your
Yes.
specialism.
So we've got a
Yeah,
small charity struggling, obviously, under the financial pressures.
yeah, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because some things by nature will have costs associated with them. If
Mm,
we're talking about sort of physical changes to a building, so I think sometimes it can be difficult to make a physical change to a building. We often find that in our branches, um, there are restrictions that are imposed upon us by local authorities. The
yeah,
buildings are old or listed, and you can't make physical changes. But sometimes there are simpler things that if you want to provide your services to a particular group, rather than having them come to you, then looking at how you provide your services out in the community or via telephone, or where we've not been able to do anything else. There are some markets where we've had to say, no, we can't have the doors fully open all the time to let people in. But the simple thing that we can do as a starting point is to have a bell on the outside. If somebody
nice.
needs support,
Yeah.
they can at least summon some help for somebody to come and see them. It's not what we'd want to do. It's not,
Mm,
as an employer, as a provider of services to customers, the way that we'd want to provide our services. But sometimes you have to start
it's better than that.
small and
Yeah.
look at what you can do within the constraints that you've got. And then if we're looking at neurodiversity, then we might not have space in some locations to have individual rooms for sort of
Mm,
adjustable lighting, or for sort of multi-phase type rooms, and then another room that is the sort of the quiet room, and you have to sort of use the space that you've got as efficiently as you can, which then comes onto that education, and sometimes having the conversation
mm,
amongst colleagues, as long as the person who needs the support is willing to be part of that, and for people
yeah.
to ask what they can do to help,
Have that conversation.
then
Yeah.
that can sometimes break down those barriers. So certainly, I think we find talking, getting involvement, and being
Mm,
open is a great way to unlock some of those challenges. But absolutely, there are always some physical challenges where it's difficult and you can't overcome it, and have to look at other ways in which you might sort of
I
go
mean,
about providing
I love
service.
the Bell idea. I mean, we touched upon it a little bit earlier before the call. I'd gone to a local Starbucks in Tunbridge Wells. It was peeing down with rain as it has been the last couple of days. They only had the bell. They didn't have an automatic door. So I'm stood there with my friend with a baby buggy, and we got absolutely drowned before anybody could get to the front door. And that's a challenge if you've got a leasehold property, where even if you've got the will to do
Yeah,
that, the landlord might say to you, no, I'm not prepared to pay, or let you do it. But you can get some capital work done through Access to Work. You
yeah.
can get capital grants from them. It's not the easiest thing to do, but I've seen up to 150,000 spent on lifts where they've been needed. The other thing, when it comes to the little inside bits like chairs and desks, if you work with local businesses, or you look on the local free sites, you'll always see desks and chairs up for rehoming for no money. They might not be the prettiest, but they're free. And if that helps you to achieve the ends that you need. The other thing I wanted to mention before I come back to you, Paul, is if you've not seen a software, there's a software called Welcome Me, which is wel-co.me. I don't know if you come across it, Jim, at all, but it's as sorry, I was going to say cheap as anything. It's really good value for money. It's a really low cost. So if you have it on, I don't know, your receptionist's iPad or tablet, whatever they're using, I've downloaded it on my phone. I don't use a wheelchair, but I'm using this as an example. I could say, I'm coming to see you tomorrow, Jim, 2:30. I'm a wheelchair user. When I arrive, can I have a wheelchair space? Can somebody come and get me out the car? Can they take me to an accessible loo? Because before I have a meeting, I'm going to need a wee. And can you get me a coffee? That would be great before my meeting at 2:30. When I turn up in the car park, I push the button on my phone. It goes straight to reception. Reception's got a picture of me and goes, oh, it's Tracy. She's got a wheelchair. Let's get her in. She needs to go to the loo. She needs a cup of coffee, and she's going to room 5 to see Jim. It takes all of that stress out of it. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have to necessarily have accessible doors, but your receptionist comes in and helps that person. So it's far more personalized. If you're not able to make those building changes, I would honestly recommend Welcome
Absolutely.
as a
And
nice.
I think that
It's
there
a
is
great system.
so much technology that is
Yeah,
evolving that we continue to look at as well as how could we use some of the new technologies around sort of mapping of the branch spaces or the office
yeah,
spaces to
yeah.
make it available to colleagues who are have a visual impairment, who are blind, but maybe also just find it difficult in terms of navigating around a building. So
That
we're
will be
exploring
me.
some of those as well.
I'm not very good on big buildings. Paul, I wanted to come back around Sheffield, because Sheffield's kind of where it all started for us as a business, looking at what a company like yourself was doing. The fact that you've done the intersectionality with all of your colleagues and looking at the customer journey, to take such a big, bold move that cost you a great deal of money, in the knowledge that it wasn't just a nice to do, it wasn't just the right thing to do, but it made business sense to make that move. Was it a really easy thing to get over the line with the higher ups in the bank?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that we really didn't have any pushback on it, and
I love that.
in the in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't that it wasn't a huge cost. If I'm completely honest, I think we spent about 10% more on that branch, which actually what we were looking at with the rollout costs was how we could just obviously make it
Go on,
cost
what was the
neutral.
number? Can you tell us?
No,
Go
but
on, I was
I think
curious.
no, but I think look, to me it was around making accessibility business as usual. It's not about trying to
Yeah,
create something that you can't replicate. And the conversation that we just had. Look, in Mexico, we make the entrance accessible. The doors are left open. Now, I had endless conversations with them on it, but actually all the doors are left open. It's a different climate. That's how they make the doors accessible. They just leave them open. So with a lot of the issues that we come across, it's actually about walking through the customer journey. And
mm,
I know it sounds like, well, oh yeah, everybody knows that. But I mean, there'll be endless number of branches that I've seen where we've put all the stuff in, but for example, the door loadings, the waitings on opening the doors throughout the journey are too heavy for people in a wheelchair to actually get through. And it's just actually, have you actually checked? So I do, while I think on a new branch or a relocation, and we sort of have a program, you should be able to get those journeys through. And should, I recognize that what the person was saying on the call, when you've got a historic branch where you're trying to make those changes, it can be quite complicated. But we always say to people, look, if you're doing a new branch, make it accessible, because actually the cost of not making it accessible is going to come back to you in the future.
Yeah.
And we've got any number of markets now because the whole world is changing. We've got additional spend in Taiwan, India, all of these markets recognizing the need to make all of their offices, well centers, branches accessible, because that's the way of the world. That's where we need to get to. And if you do it straight off, it's not a huge cost, but you have to do it in terms of a customer journey and making sure there's, I say that because any number of accessible washrooms that I've seen in branches that you can't get to. So I'm sort of saying, well, no, let's make sure it's got level access and go through. And I know we do keep going back to sort of wheelchair accessibility, but it applies to all forms of accessibility as well. If you do it at the outset, it's not a huge cost. It's just a cost in time and effort to make sure you get those journeys absolutely right, Tracy, by talking to the right people. And as Jim said, making sure you're talking to people with a lived experience.
I think that lived experience is really the crux, isn't it, Jim?
Oh, definitely. And I was listening to what Paul was saying. I think the key to that is about making good decisions early, because if you've got the right team on your projects in terms of architects, designers who are informed and willing to listen to those lived experiences, that's when you get a great outcome. And I'm sure our architects that we work with, as we went through the Sheffield journey, were sort of learning far more than they could ever have got from reading, BSI back to front, looking at each approved code. And certainly I've seen, in buildings in the past where everybody has probably ticked the box as far as an approved code is concerned. We've got an accessible toilet. In fact, we've got 2 on the floor. But then when we accompanied one of our colleagues who was a wheelchair user on that journey to the accessible toilet, he could just about push the door open to get into the corridor where the toilet was. And then the door into the toilet was, weighted so it was easy to open and close. But once you came back out of that toilet to go back onto the office floor, there was no way for a wheelchair user to physically pull open a really heavy door. So, yes, the architects had fulfilled their design brief in putting an accessible toilet in.
It was wide enough for the wheelchair. What was your problem?
But for the wheelchair user themselves, once you looked at the wider journey, it just wasn't accessible at all. So thinking holistically about the building from, I suppose, not even the front door, the car park, through into sort of where everybody's going to use.
And actually, that's a really good point, Jim, isn't it? From the car park. I mean, you talked about the customer journey, Paul. It's not literally them getting on a bus, but it is from the point that they get off the bus, cross the road, or go into the car park with their car. Because I've seen car parks where the disabled bays are way over there. How's the person supposed to get to the front door to even transact? No, I mean, okay, way over there for most of us probably isn't a challenge, but if you've got mobility problems, it bloody well is. So it's I think
absolutely.
what we're getting to with all of this is very much look at how people are using the space, what people are using the spaces, but is there somewhere that people can go to? I mean, I'm presuming they could go to RIBA, the Royal Institute of something British Architects. Yay! Is there a list that they have there that will give you the basic framework that people can take away from this to consider? Should they be looking at disability impact assessment forms like the local councils use, for example? What are some really good frameworks that people can look at, take away? Or do they all phone you up, Paul, and say, what shall I do?
I mean, all the councils have their own, all the councils have the framework. I think obviously there is the local code. I mean, what we tend to do is for the markets, we tend to produce a checklist based on, and we try to get, with the minimum standards, we try to get onto a page because there is quite a lot of it. So what we want people to do, our architects and designers, is to go back and check key things. I think if you walk through the journey, it's not a difficult thing to do to put a little checklist together. We certainly have a number that we put on our website to do. I mean, post this call, if you want us to put together, get our heads
That
together,
would be
Tracy, and share
amazing. Yeah, yeah,
something with the group. Happy to do that.
yeah. That
There
would
is
be
quite a lot of
fab.
resources out there. There's, some of these people are absolute experts on it. So let's put them in touch with those people.
That would be really, really useful, I think. We've got kind of 4 minutes left. We've answered the questions. If there's anything that anybody's got as a burning question, can you put it in the Q&A for me? But to look at what we've been talking about today, it really is the idea that you're flexible around the framework that you've got, understanding the different cultural impacts. If you're working abroad, that it might not be appropriate. I mean, I can't imagine a Bank of England, partly because of the weather, partly because of securities with the doors open. I love the fact that you've got that in another country as a reasonable adjustment. It works really well. Looking and making sure that you've got one of the things you mentioned, Jim, was the I think it was Jim, sorry, the heating and the lighting. We've all worked in those offices where you get one person who suffers from the cold really badly, whacks the heating up every day, and the rest of us are schwitzing where we sit, and they will never turn it down. So that ability to almost personalize the space, we've got to be cognizant of the fact that lots of businesses are now asking people to come back in the office. And quite frankly, given the heating and fuel costs, I'm almost tempted to go back in the office. It must be cheaper than being at home. But
Popular
that's
place to
got
be
to
the
be
next few
thought about.
months. Yeah.
Well, yeah, you're not
Yeah.
joking. I'm coming up your office actually, Jim. Mine's too far away from here. But it's things like not one size fits all. So don't
Yeah.
look at a blind person, whether you're making reasonable adjustments, workplace adjustments for them in the office, or whether they're a customer. That blind person might have completely different needs to the next 17. It's exactly the same with neurodivergence as well. One person's got ADHD, their needs will be very different from the next person. Even women and men, I mean, I hate to say it, as simple as that. So be as inclusive. I love that you mentioned, Paul, about the recruitment, making sure that the people that you're employing reflects the society that you are supporting and serving, because otherwise you have no understanding of that
Absolutely.
community. So
Absolutely.
how can you
Absolutely.
serve it? So
Absolutely.
it's been fascinating talking to you about that, because I know that HSBC have done a wealth of work, and I've been involved in some of it around the recruitment, how they can change, what they can do differently. And I
Yeah.
have to say, whatever anybody says about big business, you guys, without a shadow, have been the most open to change, and you drive that change through because you can see the benefit, and it's the business benefit as well as the human benefit, and it always seems to come across that way. So it doesn't matter whether you're doing a new branch, and I really do encourage you all to find pictures of it. It's lovely. You've won what, 14 awards now, I think it is, and
Yeah.
I think you should have got more, quite frankly. It's a lovely space, but it was a really lovely space for the colleagues as well. That was thought about, the kitchen area was thought about, the biophilia. Don't underestimate. We've got plants, you can't even see mine here, but we've all got plants in our home because it's lovely. It softens the sound, it softens the feel of the space. And that's the sort of thing we are encouraging people to look at. So really, I wanted just to say quickly, thanks to you both. Is there any last comment that you want to make before you go back to sleep, actually, Paul? It's
I
10
think
o'clock in China. Not that he sleeps during the day, folks.
I think
No, I
the one from me, and just picking up on
Please,
one of the
please.
comments that I see in sort of the chat, um, is around the most difficult part is probably changing people's perception and thinking towards disability and neurodiversity. So the actual physical changes are relatively straightforward to do and can be cost effective, but we still need to collectively spend a lot of time spreading the message, being open in those conversations. And that's when we'll start to see the global changes, is as we get that evolution in people's thinking. Sorry, Paul, I cut you off.
Paul,
No, I
we
was just going
had
to
a
say,
request here for you to start the story again that you were telling before you cut out last time. I don't know if you remember what it was. I'm afraid I don't. Can you remember?
It was about sustainability, I think, wasn't it?
It was about sustainability. Thank you, Jim.
It was really good, but we're running out of time. But no,
It was a great story. Sorry you missed it, folk. What can I say? I'll give you
Next one,
Paul's
part
private
two.
email later to find out.
Part two. Happy to talk to anybody on the call. Just to say that I think the thing I've learned is we're still learning, and you've got to just
Yeah,
keep
I
talking to
love that.
people. And the more I go out and talk to people, as soon as you understand where they're coming from, you go, gosh, yeah, I need to just change that a little bit. I need to, yeah. And most of the changes I don't think are that expensive. And I know it sometimes seems that way, but if you start by talking to people and understand where they're coming from, I think it can all be done. And certainly what I've seen in other markets, the UK, we need to move, because actually other markets are moving beyond what we're doing.
Yeah.
I've been surprised that, you know, we've sort of been, I think, not resting on our laurels, but the world is going at a faster pace, and we need to keep up. We need to keep up. We're good, but we need to be better.
Yeah, I hear that. Thank you so much, both. Fascinating romp through accessible buildings. Really appreciate your time. We'll be sending stuff out, but thank you everybody for joining today, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you,
all. Thanks very
everybody.
much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.